Welcome to the final chapter of our journey through the exhibition of the year, Caravaggio 2025. In this third and final episode, we followed Caravaggio through the turbulent years of his exile. 4 years on the run, from justice and from himself, across Malta, Naples and Sicily, where the line between life and art becomes increasingly blurred, leading to a dramatic and mysterious end. Enjoy your visit. Condemned to death in absentia. The sentence is clear. Anyone who encounters him may kill him. In those last days of May 1606, Caravaggio is a man on the run. He will find refuge just outside Rome, protected by one of the most powerful families of the time, the Colonna. A deep bond unites them, born many years before, when the life of young Michelangelo had intertwined with that of the noble woman Costanza Colonna. Those were the years in Milan, where he had moved at only 13 years old to study painting, after a childhood spent in Caravaggio, away from the plague that had claimed his father Fermo. Guiding figures in those uncertain years were his mother Lucia and his grandfather Giacomo, who had done everything possible to offer him a better future, paying for his studies with one of the best painters in the city. In Milan, the 13-year-old apprentice had found a precious ally in Costanza Colonna, a noble woman that had taken to heart that restless and talented young man and was always close to him. And in that summer of 1606, after fleeing Rome, her intervention was decisive in saving his life. Caravaggio was host in the Colonna palaces at the gates of Rome and spent there his months of exile, never ceasing to paint. But neither his heart nor the slow life of the Roman countryside can soothe his torment, and the works of this period become increasingly personal, a reflection of a restless soul. St. Francis in Meditation was painted for the Capuchin friars of Carpineto Romano. It's a subject we already encountered at the beginning of our story, when the young Caravaggio, in the midst of his rise, was still searching for his own voice. But in this second version, St. Francis finds no comfort, neither in the embrace of an angel, nor in the peace of nature. He's completely alone, among harsh rocks, wrapped in a worn-out habit, contemplating the irregular contours of a skull. It is a silent dialogue with human fragility, with the transience of all earthly things. The stripped-down, essential, almost ascetic work, kept for centuries in the secluded chapel of a provincial church, speaks of that summer of reflection and remorse, more than 1,000 words ever could. Who knows how Caravaggio appeared to the locals? A celebrity to be followed, a danger. Perhaps it is in the sincere and uncorrupted faces of those people that the artist seeks new models, new vital energy to continue telling his truths and stories. In the supper at Emmaus, he takes us into a bare tavern. On the table, a jug of wine and some freshly broken bread, which draws the gaze of the man in blue. The two disciples recognize him at that very moment. The man they met by chance on the road is a risen Jesus. The gestures express astonishment even before joy. One spreads his arms wide, almost entirely in shadow. The other leans forward, gripping the table with both hands. The innkeeper watches the scene with the curiosity of someone who happens to be there by chance, while the maid appears distracted, unaware of the miracle. It is one of Caravaggio's key themes, the extraordinary breaking into the everyday. In works like this, the question he poses is always the same. If you were there, who would you be? The moved apostle, the curious innkeeper, the distracted woman. Would you be able to recognize and welcome the miracle, even where you least expect it? Caravaggio had already painted this scene years earlier, at the height of his Roman success. Back then, the colors were vivid, the gestures theatrical, the table lavish. The second version belongs to a different time. The colors are muted, the gesture more restrained, the table nearly bare. everything is reduced to the most human and essential elements of the gospel story. And as in all his works from this period, it becomes harder and harder to separate the man from the artist, the life lived from the artistic invention. The David with the head of Goliath is a confession and at the same time a cry for help. Most likely created for Scipione Borghese, this painting is considered by many scholars a painted plea. The powerful nephew of the Pope, a refined collector and great admirer of Caravaggio's art, was perhaps the only man who could intercede for his pardon, and this canvas sends a clear message. The young David has defeated the Philistine giant who threatened his people. After stunning him with a slingshot, he cuts off his head and brings it to his king. In the head of Goliath, frozen in a grotesque grimace, still dripping blood, Caravaggio portrays himself. That bruised face is his own, almost like a sacrificial offering, his painted head in exchange for forgiveness. And to reinforce the message, the face of David, not as tradition would have it, a proud victor or a triumphant hero, but rather a gaze of sorrow and perhaps remorse for the brutal act. A credible human reaction in the face of a violence that seems to have been forced upon him. On the blade of the sword, which glints in the foreground, some have read a hidden message, a few letters, a cryptic monogram, an ancient motto: Humilitas occidit superbiam, humility has slain pride. An admission of guilt and repentance, a request for clemency, but it would have no effect. Just a few kilometers outside of Rome, Caravaggio no longer feels safe. Perhaps on the advice of Costanza Colonna, he decided to leave papal territory and cross the border into the Spanish kingdom, seeking refuge in Naples, beyond the reach of extradition. There, in the southern capital, no one seems concerned with his past. He is welcomed as a great master, and the local nobility compete for the honor of commissioning new works. Caravaggio's art in Naples is a revelation that electrifies the city, just as it had in Rome years earlier. Writers of the time agree in describing the Flagellation of Christ, now housed in the Capodimonte Museum, as his Neapolitan masterpiece. Imagine it in its original setting, in the dim light of a chapel in the church of San Domenico Maggiore, with life-sized figures emerging from the darkness of the background. Seen from afar, they create a disorienting effect. For a moment, we might truly feel as though we are there in Pilate's palace, helpless witnesses to the Passion of Christ. Christ's body, statuesque and still, is fully illuminated. Meanwhile, the three torturers revolve around him in the shadows, performing a choreography of unsettling gestures that hint at the violence to come. One crouches on the ground, preparing the scourge by tying together dry branches. Another kicks him while tying his hand to the column. The third grips his hair, ready to strike. The contrast between the brutality of the torturers and the surrendered body of Christ is impossible to ignore. The Neapolitan audience is hypnotized, one author would write. This new manner of that terrifying way of shadowing, the realism of those nudes, left not only amateurs but even seasoned masters quite astonished. Both young artists and established masters rush to study him, imitate him, and unravel his secret. In a short time, Caravaggio's style conquers Naples and spreads from there throughout all Spanish territories, reaching as far as Madrid, the heart of the empire. And it is from Madrid that the next work arrives. In 2021, a painting attributed to a follower of Caravaggio was put on auction in Madrid with a starting price of just 3,000 euros. But something didn't add up. The eyes of experts notice a quality far beyond the ordinary. A race against time began, analysis, studies, comparisons, and in the end the confirmation. Almost unanimously, scholars attributed the painting to Caravaggio himself. A new masterpiece had emerged from the shadows, a previously unknown work, probably painted during his time in Naples and lost in oblivion for over 4 centuries. It was acquired by an anonymous collector for an estimated price of around 30 million euros. And for the first time ever, this painting is being shown in Italy on loan from the Prado Museum. The painting is the natural continuation of the Passion narrative. After the torture, Christ is brought before the crowd. Pilate presents him, hoping the sight of the humiliated, bleeding man might quench the people's thirst for violence. Ecce Homo, behold the man. Humiliated and mocked, Jesus is dressed as a king. The crown of thorns, the reed scepter, the purple cloak. A guard in the background stands with his mouth wide open. Is he shouting words of mockery, or is he stunned by the crowd's fury? Pilate, in the extreme foreground, points to Christ and stares directly at us. That crowd is us. And Caravaggio pins us to the question, in their place, what would we have done? We've reached the final room of the exhibition. Here, 3 works guide us through Caravaggio's last dramatic years. His move to Malta, the escape to Sicily, the return to Naples, and finally his desperate attempt to reach Rome again. Moving to Malta had a clear purpose: to join the Order of the Knights of St. John, thanks to the Colonna family's intercession, and to gain a status that could rehabilitate him and bring him closer to receiving a pardon. The plan seemed to be working. Caravaggio was welcomed to the island, and after winning favor with the order through his art, he received the title of Knight. He signed as Fra Michelangelo for the first time in the most important painting of that period, the beheading of St. John the Baptist for the cathedral in Valletta. It seemed like the beginning of redemption, but something once again broke. More and more like a character from a noir novel, the artist committed a crime, the details of which remain unknown, and fell from grace once more. He was imprisoned and then escaped. He fled to Sicily, where he may have painted this work, the portrait of the Florentine knight Antonio Martelli, an ally within the order, the man who may have helped save him and welcomed him in Messina, Sicily. It's a swift, almost impromptu portrait. The cross of the order gleams against the black uniform, while the weathered face emerges with just few essential expressive strokes. The technique by now is stripped to the bone, nervous brushstrokes left visible, a palette reduced to earthly essential tones. This is the raw, urgent style of the final Caravaggio, the frenzied ease that foreshadow his hand. During his Sicilian stay, the artist pursued commission across Syracuse, Messina and Palermo, leaving behind unforgettable works. But what truly drove him was a single obsessive thought: returning to Rome. The possibility of a pardon, which some voices claimed was now near. So he returns to Naples, accepting new commissions to save the money needed for his great return. The Martyrdom of Saint Ursula is Caravaggio's very last Napolitan work. Marcantonio Doria, a Genovese banker, commissioned the painting as a gift to his young stepdaughter, who had just entered a convent under the name Sister Ursula. Saint Ursula, a Breton martyr from the 5th century, was a symbol of incorruptible virginity and devotion. According to legend, she was captured along with her companions by the Huns. King Attila promised to spare her life on the condition that she would marry him. Ursula, who had consecrated herself to God, refused, and that refusal cost her life. In Caravaggio's painting, Attila, dressed in 17th century clothing, had just released the arrow. He watches astonished as it pierced the heart of the young woman, who brings her hands to her chest, pale yet distant, as if death could not truly touch her. Around them, the soldiers gathered in silence among the tents of the encampment. Caravaggio paints himself among them, mouth open, a witness to the martyrdom. He doesn't yet know this will be his final self-portrait. A letter from Marcantonio Doria's agent in Naples tells us that Caravaggio delivered the painting in haste, with the colors still fresh. In an attempt to dry them in the sun, the work was damaged and had to be quickly repaired just before the artist's departure for Rome. It is July 1610. The time of exile seems to be coming to an end. There is talk of a possible agreement with the Tommasoni family, the family of Ranuccio, to be signed at Porto Ercole, north of Rome, a necessary prelude to the granting of papal pardon. Caravaggio, boarding the boat sailing north along the coast, carries with him several paintings meant for Scipione Borghese, a gift of thanks to the man who holds his fate in his hands. One of those paintings is Saint John the Baptist, which concludes the exhibition. More than a saint, he looks like a young shepherd, caught in a moment of rest, leaning on his staff under the branches of a vine, which the ram beside him turns to nibble on. No halo, no cross. The saint is stripped of his traditional attributes. There is no more time, no more space for the rhetoric of the sacred. What remains is only the man. What strikes us about this final figure is his gaze, melancholic, disillusioned, the look of someone who has lived little but already seen too much. A silent prophet, as some have written, or perhaps simply the self-portrait of a weary soul. This final painting, this melancholic saint, almost an accidental testament, would arrive in Rome some time later and find its place as intended in the Borghese collection where it still belongs today. But the artist himself, the creator, the director, the painter, Caravaggio, would never reach Rome again. On July 18, 1610, he was found dead on the beach of Porto Ercole, a coastal town north of Rome, under mysterious circumstances, a sudden illness, or perhaps a fight, a settling of scores. The answer is the stuff of novels. There are a few certainties. He was 39 years old, and beside him, until the end, his paintings, his passport, his reason for living, his testament. But the death of a great artist is often the beginning of his legend. The echo of his revolution would know no borders. For decades, from Naples to Madrid, from Antwerp to Marseille, the art of Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio continued to live on in the work of his followers. From him, they had learned a new way of looking deeply into the folds of reality, seeking meaning in the smallest details, casting light on the marginalized, telling without filters the grandeur and misery of humankind. A truthful art made of light and shadow that still speaks to us today, more alive than ever.